The One Piece live action has finally arrived. I thought we would never see the day, and honestly, a while back, I thought I would never want to see the day. But now that it's here, as somebody who's read the manga and watched bits and pieces of the anime, is it a worthy adaptation of Eiichiro Oda's phenomenal work? Watch to the very end to find out. Before I start, let me say that I am very critical of live action anything, not just anime adaptations. That's just who I am. Whereas I'm very lenient to anime and manga, so just bear in mind that I will be fair and praise the show where it deserves and critique it where I feel necessary. But remember, it's just my opinion, so who really gives a f***? Now, I think a good starting point for this is to assess the centerpiece of the entire world of One Piece, the Straw Hat Crew. Starting with Monkey D. Luffy, Iñaki Godoy. I do not envy him, playing one of the most iconic fictional characters in history for the first time in live action. So how does he do? Honestly, I'd say he's pretty decent. He pulls off the happy and airheaded side of Luffy pretty well, but Luffy isn't always laughing. Sometimes he gets serious. And I fear it's those moments where Iñaki struggles to measure up to the source material. Rather than sounding badass like this, he sounds like this.
But you made our navigator cry.
And it's just a teensy bit cringy. I don't know if it's a lack of acting chops, but his serious moments just didn't resonate the way they're supposed to for me. Next up, let's talk about Zoro, which from the little bit of noise I've listened to about this show, seems to be the favorite adaptation from the original characters. Now I will admit that Mackenyu does a great job displaying the swordplay and Zoro's tough guy side, but that's not all that Zoro is. He likes to laugh and joke around too, and Mackenyu struggles to bring that out of him at times, though that may be no fault of his own, as it seems the script rarely gives Zoro an opportunity to smile at all. So overall, Zoro is portrayed fairly well with a little bit of heart missing in my opinion. On to our navigator Nami. Now with Nami, I may have had the same complaint as Zoro, not being cheerful enough, but early One Piece Nami is kind of like that before the Arlong incident is resolved, so I'm not going to judge Emily Rudd or the script on that too harshly. The only outright complaint I have about Nami in this show is, she's way too fucking good at fighting, bro. One of the things I love about Nami in the manga is that she starts out pretty useless on the battlefield and is struggling to find a way to help the boys in that respect. But then she finds her own way to fight, and that's kind of an arc for her. Here, she's wielding that bow staff like a fucking Sith Lord. I don't know where that shit came from. She looks like she could beat Zoro in a fight for real. So that's a little disappointing that that arc is now basically never gonna happen, because I think that's good for her character. Now, the great Captain Usopp. Certainly the most annoying character on the crew in the manga. And as much as I love the manga, even I found him insufferable at times when reading it. But he eventually gains my respect later on. In the live action, Jacob Romero maintains his cowardly side, but it's not overly in your face, which is for the better in a live action setting, because I don't think this show would get a second season if Usopp is the way he is in the manga. Funnily enough, he's probably my favorite character here, and his caring side is more front and center. He even got me to laugh a few times, where in the manga, I just wanted him to shut the fuck up. Only negative, no nose jokes. Last but not least, Sanji, portrayed by Taz Skylar. Saw the least of him. Honestly, not much to say because the entire berate arc was severely shortened, which we'll get into in a bit. But that also cut out a lot of his character moments in the East Blue section of the story. Not much to say here. Have to see more of him. It's probably for the best that he's not as goofy when around women, and Nami in particular, as he is in the manga. He has no curly eyebrow, but that doesn't really matter to me. As for the backstories of each of these characters, even disregarding the source material, honestly, none of them, except for maybe Sanji's, really did anything for me. I just don't think they're done very well. That's all I'm going to say about that, because I'm not into shitting on child actors, so let's just move on. Little side note, there's also an option to watch the show with the original Japanese cast of the entire crew dubbing over it, which I think is great. If I rewatch it, that'll probably be my preferred way to watch. Maybe that's just because I'm used to the Japanese cast, but it does really make it feel more like the anime has come to life for me. Now let's cover each arc of the show, shall we? It's worth mentioning that whilst I have read the manga, I caught up a year ago and I haven't gone back to reread these arcs since then, because this isn't a video meant to nitpick every little thing that's not manga accurate. If you want a video where I compare manga and live action differences, I'll make one, if this video gets to 500 likes. Now, the first episode covers Shelltown, where Luffy recruits Zoro and Nami, but before we get there, he saves Kobe from Alvida, who, I'm not gonna lie, is god-awful in this. But I didn't even like her in the manga, and we move on quickly, so that's what I'm going to do here. He saves Kobe from her ship, which I will say is a good casting choice. Maybe shakes his head a little too much, but that's okay. The entire section where Luffy rescues Zoro and he and Nami steal the map is solid. I like the fight scene, the Gum Gum CGI is serviceable. They do a good job of hiding it when necessary, and it works well enough for me. A good portion of this first episode is also taken up by Luffy's backstory, which I already touched on backstories before. But here all I'll say is that Shanks is good, he works for me, Kid Luffy does not, let's leave it at that. Then we move on to the Buggy arc, which is very underwhelming and severely cut down for obvious reasons, because that could fill up half the season on its own. Buggy's actor portrays him well here though, and even his CGI is fine. Not great, but it doesn't knock me out of the show. However, one of the main charms of the manga is that along with the captains of the other crews which Luffy usually fights, there are lieutenants and such for the other crew members to fight, which allows their characters to be fleshed out a little more. Here we have Kabaji, who was in the manga, but he really does nothing and is taken out in a second. Again, I understand why they shorten it, but I can't say it's not to the detriment of the growth of the characters. The next two episodes are, in my opinion, the ones that do the best in capturing the feel of the manga. Klahadore Okura was a great casting choice, Kaya does very well, and whilst yes, the other members of the Black Cat Pirates are dull, they're nice fodder for Zoro to show off his swordsmanship. They chose to omit Django from the manga, who is supposed to be Kuro's first mate, which is sad. He's definitely a fun character, but for me, Kuro does enough to carry the antagonist for these two episodes. The kids who follow Usopp around and believe in him are also missing. They could have been a nice addition to give Usopp some more heart. Nevertheless, we also get to see both Usopp and Zoro's backstories in this. Usopp's is whatever, Zoro's is just underwhelming. The actors for Kuina and young Zoro just don't do it for me at all. And now it's time to eat at berate. I'm happy with Zeph's look. His hat's just the right length for it to be believable. Good introduction to Sanji, but the entire family-like feeling that the restaurant had, especially with one of the other head chefs whose name I forgot, is kind of missing here. Certainly because of time constraints, but it still would have been nice to see. Now another thing they certainly cut out because of time constraints. The entire Don Creek fight. Here he never even visits Berate to start trouble. Instead he's reserved to a 30-second cameo where Mihawk can cut him down, which is a disappointment. Because of that, a lot of character building for Sanji and Zeph is missing, which we only get to see in Sanji's backstory. The only backstory that was actually done well, in my opinion. Thank you for keeping Zeph eating his leg, unlike the anime. As for the rest of the episode, we see the Zoro vs Mihawk fight, which on top of being fairly manga accurate, was just a fun time. Mihawk's actor Stephen Ward does a great job portraying the warlord. I'm a little sad to not see Zoro's pirate hunting buddies pop up here. They're just fun characters, would have been nice to see them in here. And I really do not like the fact that Arlong shows up at Berate looking for Luffy and takes Nami with him. Or that Buggy is for some reason still in the show. There's no reason Nami couldn't just sneak back home on her own like in the manga, especially since it makes the Luffy-Arlong fight feel much more impactful. The cool part about the Arlong confrontation for me is that he's built up to be some unbeatable opponent who wouldn't look twice at somebody like Luffy, until he breaks down his door and makes him notice him, then beats him, establishing himself as a pirate to be reckoned with. But regardless, they get pretty much everything else about the Nami drama right, with her trying to buy back her village's freedom, and then getting backstabbed by Arlong. Although, I absolutely hate Nojiko in this. Why?
Why? Why? Why?
Well, in the manga, she also isn't aware of Nami's deal. But being her sister, she knows that she must be working with him for a good reason, and so is still friendly with her. Here, she just assumes that the little girl she grew up with woke up one day and decided to become a fishman's harlot and doesn't have half the brain cell to try and figure out why she would want to join the person who killed their mother. Completely ruins her character and the sisterly bond that's supposed to exist between them. And in the end, she just goes, "Oh well, sorry, I didn't realize you're actually not a bitch. I like you again." Garbage. Anyways, well done on this iconic scene. Nami's backstory is alright, and the final fight between Luffy and Arlong, whilst lacking the impact that was there in the manga, is at least visually appealing. The fishmen are done about as well as you can imagine live-action fishmen to look. I really don't know what they could have done better. Sad to not see Hachan here, but I imagine that would have been a nightmare for the costume and VFX departments. Zoro and Sanji's dynamic here is perfectly reminiscent of the manga. I'm glad they kept the Usopp fight against this lipsy fishman dude. But again, what the fuck is Buggy doing here? He adds nothing. And finally, I've been avoiding this all along, but I no longer can. The Marine side story. The only part that I actually think is just straight stupid in this adaptation, apart from the Nojiko thing. First of all, this is not the Garp I know. Where's the laid-back, laughter-filled, airheaded Garp I know and love? Because this ain't him. And why is he fucking Welsh?
And submit to my authority.
Okay, that doesn't matter too much. Second of all, He should not be introduced this early on. If you're going to go with this personality type, it would be better suited to a Kainu or Smoker who's teased at the end of the final episode. And in the end, all he does is go, I know you want to be a pirate. I just have to make sure you knew. What the fuck? What are you going to do with Garp now? Just have him sit on the side with his thumb up his ass? This entire Marine side story should have just been scrapped, and more time should have been dedicated to the crew and the character development, which could have remedied some of the issues I've mentioned so far in this review. I would have rather had the Dawn Creek section in here than the entire Marine section. Now that I've reviewed every episode, what do I, as a manga reader first, think of the One Piece live action? It's good. I enjoyed it. I even laughed multiple times. If I had to give it a rating, it would probably be around a 7 out of 10. If you remove the Marine stuff, maybe even an 8. As far as anime live actions go, from what I hear, that may as well be a 10 out of 10. What the show does very well is its production. All the sets and costumes are extremely well done and manga accurate, for the most part. Cinematography is great. They're even shot-for-shot recreations of the manga, which I really appreciate. Overall, I'm happy for the cast and crew and for Oda-sensei. And for all the new One Piece fans that are going to get introduced to the world after watching this, I would recommend you go and watch this because even though I clearly don't think it's perfect, I can tell it's made with love and passion for the source material, which is extremely important and something that's been missing from live-action anime adaptations. It also has to be said that whereas the manga is a weekly or bi-weekly thing, each live-action episode probably costs millions to make, so not everything can be fit in that I or any other One Piece fan would want. I do not envy the showrunner, who himself is a big fan of the manga when it comes to making the decisions to cut out beloved sections. But at the end of the day, not only is time limited, so is money. I wish I could evaluate this show without any prior knowledge of One Piece to see what I would think, but since that's impossible, if you're someone who's watched this show and never read the manga or watched the anime, leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. And if you've listened to me vent this long, why haven't you subscribed already? If you want me to make a manga live action comparison video, again, make sure to get this video to 500 likes and I'll make it happen. As for the future of the show, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing where it goes and how it handles the future arcs, but I have no idea how they're going to pull off some of the things that are coming up without pissing off a whole lot of people. But Oda-sensei is heavily involved in its creation, so it can't be that bad, right? Right? Why'd they have to do Garp like that, though? I don't know how Oda-sensei let that happen.